Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Basil Considine. I'm here from the ACU Online Writing Center, and this is Conflict Resolution Insightful Case Study Analysis. In this targeted webinar, we are going to look at how to analyze a case study and demonstrate insight. We're going to use an assignment from CONR 602, but these principles can be applied to any case study analysis that you do, keeping in mind that any assignment will have particular things that it is asking you to emphasize. So we'll look at some ways to demonstrate this in your phrasing, through your use of citations, and how to use a specific prompt to come up with an outline and language that makes it clear that you're doing the exact things that you're asked to analyze. If you're new to the Writing Center, we do work with students at all stages of the writing process, and this includes things like asynchronous appointments where you upload your draft and we send you feedback via email, and real-time appointments where you can schedule a particular time to speak with someone over the phone or via Zoom. More information about this on the Writing Center website. Let's dive into looking at how you will find other resources like this. So this is one of many webinars that we have in the semester. And every webinar that we have offered is recorded and made available through the Online Writing Center website and through our YouTube channel. Now you can see we've got a lot of releases, including some that may align with what you are looking for and what you have to do. Literature searches, for example, are something that are done in many of our programs for different assignments. And so if you're looking for things in general, you can just browse our catalog. But we also have a sorted program-specific webinar guide. So for example, if you are in the CONR program, just scroll down on the schedule till you see this tabbed view, and then click on CONR, and you'll see sorted by course all the tie-ins we have for those specific classes. One more thing before we dive in, you'll see me using our APA course paper template. You can download that from the link at the top. And with that, let's look at our main learning objectives today. So we're going to explore how to demonstrate insight in case study analysis. This is something where there are many ways, but we'll look at some of the most common and most clear ways of demonstrating insight and understanding. And then we'll look specifically at the assignment and how to meld the two in the process of outlining and drafting the paper. So, demonstrating insight. Well, it's always helpful to look and see what exactly are we talking about. And in this case, insight could be understood as an accurate and deep understanding, this is the Merriam-Webster dictionary, or a clear, deep, and sometimes sudden understanding of a complicated problem or situation. Now, clear, deep, sometimes sudden. So the sometimes sudden, think not as, oh, that came to me and I wasn't expecting it, but as demonstrating, oh, because of this, here is what is natural to do now. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit. But it's also important to look at the next part of the definition of a complicated problem or situation. If it was just a matter of, oh, so-and-so owes this person money, they should go and pay that now, that's not really providing deep insight. That's a very simple cause and effect problem solution thing, not even a huge problem. So if it's more complicated, well, they don't have enough money to pay all the things, so what is the best thing to do? Well, that starts to get more complicated, and we'll delve into that more as we go along. Some things to not do when you're trying to demonstrate insight. Don't have lots of paragraphs that are all summary. This is a common trap when writing up a case study analysis, to spend a lot of time summarizing the case study. In most cases, a 2 or 3 sentence summary is fine, and then you bring up specific details as you discuss them. You can cite the case study, and in fact, the assignment we're looking at today refers specifically how the instructor wants you to cite the case study, and then not keep citing it so as to keep the focus on the analysis. You don't want to report things without explaining how or why they're important, the implications. Don't use very short sentences. So if you're going to be giving some insight, we want it to have enough discussion for people to grab onto, and that's just not likely if you have 5 or 6 words only in the sentence. Also, you don't want to lose your reader. If you're having very long sentences, more likely than not you're doing a lot of that extended summary that, especially in this assignment, you don't want to be doing. Make sure you don't bury the main idea or focus in the middle of a paragraph. And particularly, some things you should do, make sure you provide a concise summary of the key issues and/or opportunities. And in doing so, explain why addressing this issue or problem matters. And what's the big picture? What will addressing this allow you to do? And what happens if it's not addressed? Make sure you break the task into discrete steps and that you give a clear plan for how you're going to accomplish them. And ground your recommendations in evidence-based practice and theory by citing the literature. Now, I've added these arrows here because these are 2 things that are especially emphasized in the assignment that we're going to be looking at. Now, I've referred to synthesis in many of my other webinars, and we have a whole webinar on it. But when we look at this first bullet point on the slide, have paragraphs that are all summary. So summary, you're just giving, here's a short version of what was said. Because, of course, you don't want to have a whole 3-page case study description in the middle of your document. That would be, first, redundant because the case study is published elsewhere, and 2, distracting because that takes away from the analysis. So synthesis is when you're taking the information and you are interpreting it or applying it or considering it together to come up with new meaning or to understand how it will function in new context or interpret this in light of other things. And that way of combining the ideas or information presented, that can be your reasoning, others considering it together, saying, they suggest in these circumstances to do the X, and because we have these circumstances, let's do that. Or they don't describe that, but this is similar to that, or this suggests that we should do X. That is one way to demonstrate synthesis. And you could break this down into saying that there is analysis, where you are discussing evidence that you have presented earlier, and a step where you apply the evidence and analysis to create new meaning as synthesis. Now, there are many ways to show synthesis, but one that we're going to recommend for you is the No Tears plan that I developed, which is an acronym for listing out the things that you should have in your paragraphs, especially in graduate level writing, to show that you are understanding something by presenting key evidence or argumentation, analyzing it, synthesizing it, and then tying it all together before you continue on to the next thing. And we have a whole webinar on this, the Beyond Summary webinar that you can find on our website. So let's look at some of the wording that you'd use to demonstrate the synthesis. And this is not an exhaustive list, but some of the most common, most helpful things to clearly show what it is that you're doing. As a result, because of this, therefore, consequently, this shows that all this wording indicates, you're referring to something earlier, something that was presented earlier, and now you are providing the new meaning or insight. Now, if you are synthesizing in their sentence, you're probably not going to have a citation. Now, you can have a sentence where you present new evidence and immediately analyze it in this next part of the sentence, in which case the first part of the sentence will have a citation. But the general model is you discuss or present your evidence separate from your analysis of it, which is separate from when you synthesize that to create new meaning. And if you keep these distinct, it'll be more clear that you're doing all the things that you're supposed to be doing when you're demonstrating insight. For example, to demonstrate analysis, when you're comparing different pieces of information, you can have text like the bolded here. In alignment with the Chique 2014, Emmanuel 2015 discovered that COPD patients responded positively to the treatment over 1 year. Now look at the second bullet. The first sentence is presenting evidence. Smith 2010 found that birth order and personality traits were connected. The second sentence is analyzing that. However, Smith's 2010 results are less likely to be generalizable due to the use of a small, homogeneous population of 11 siblings. So it's presenting a finding and saying, well, there's this thing about it that is important. That's the analysis. With that, let's look at the assignment that we're delving into today. So this is CONR 602's Assignment 8, the Case Study Power Play. Now, I'm not going to talk about the details of the specific case study. We're more interested in what the assignment asks you to do and how you might demonstrate that. So this is from the conflict resolution course, Interpersonal Conflict. And the assignment instructions begin with a note to review the scenario power play and to use the information from the course videos, those are the course lectures, from the various readings, and other sources that you might draw on that are scholarly in nature. And I referred to earlier a note about not cluttering up with excess summary and excess citation. Well, here's a specific instruction. For clarity's sake, cite Hocker et al. For the scenario in your introduction only. So when you say, oh, I'll be discussing the power play scenario, parentheses, Hocker et al., comma, whatever the publication year is. And thereafter you can just say, oh, in the case study, without having to have an author date citation. So there's a specific instruction for the professor to keep things concise, to keep things as focused on the analysis as possible, only have the formal written out Hocker et al. Citation for the case study itself in the introduction to your paper. And that everything else, if you're referring to principles or of something, or they recommend doing next, then you just have a standard author date citation. But if you're referring to the case study itself, just in the introduction. And then we have a detailed breakdown where there are questions that you're being asked to answer. Provide an introduction, and then how might the administrative assistant have changed her low power stance to a constructive one more positively? How might the doctor have changed her power over stance into a more constructive one? Okay. Consider what a constructive dialogue on this matter between the doctor and the administrative assistant might sound like, and create the beginning of that conversation. Response should be formatted in the form of a dialogue and should be 3/4 to a page long. So that it's basically two questions leading to, and give a model for how this might start. And then we have a series of 4 more questions before the conclusion. How was Coleman's concept of power as a dynamic interaction demonstrated? Based on the information given, where are we in the situated model of power and conflict? How might the doctor and the administrative assistant have each worked to balance the power? And what insight does Waller's principle of least interest provide? And in the different readings for this week, you'll find many sources that you can cite in support of this. So you're not limited just to the specific ones that are being discussed here. But certainly, when you're discussing Coleman's concept of power, you should be citing the Coleman article for at least part of your discussion. Paper specifications. So in addition to the standard APA cover page, we also need to have the word count and the date. Paper should be 1,500 to 1,600 words, which works out to about 6 to 6.5 pages of double-spaced content. So that's excluding the cover page, excluding the references, is about 6 to 6.5 pages of content. Now, I've highlighted a instruction that people often miss because the paper specs, sometimes it's very simple and it ends with, oh, APA format, double-spaced, 12-point font. So I highlighted it to make sure you don't miss it. Include a subheading for each rubric line. So when we look at the rubric here, and it says, response to question 1, response to question 2, conclusion, etc., make sure you have a heading for that. Now, does it have to say response to question 1? No, you've got other wording here that you might use. But in APA style, headings should be accurate, concise, and informative, but they don't need to be exciting. So if you had response to question 7, well, I wouldn't say it's the best heading. It would be a functional heading. Now, one exception to the put a heading for every rubric line, it would be the introduction, because first of all, having a heading at the start of your paper saying introduction is redundant, and second, there's a specific APA style rule that says do not do that. So I would not include that. And also, of course, you don't want to have one for the last two items in the rubric. Paper is 1,500 to 1,600 words. Paper exceeds basic writing standards. But if we look at this, we see, okay, responses to the 7 prompts and conclusion. Okay, so we should have at least 8 headings. And the highest level headings, there should be 8 of them. Okay, so at this point, let's go ahead and grab a copy of the APA course paper template and look at how you might start outlining this. If you don't have the template yet, you can certainly grab it from here. Now, when you first download the template, it'll have a number of instructional comments and other things like that if you've used a template before, you don't need to read through. So if you go to the Review tab, and here under Comments, select Delete all comments in document, you can get rid of them all very quickly. And in this case, this assignment does not require an abstract, so I'm just going to delete that. And then I'll go ahead and delete all this placeholder text and the placeholder references. Now, a good idea, if you know you are going to be using sources from previous weeks, is to go ahead and copy references to them from other assignments you've written into the references section here. Just remember that APA style requires that your references that are listed here all be cited in the body of your paper. So, now if we start with just copy and pasting the instructions, that's not a bad place for this, because this is an assignment where each of those instructions has a specific language that you want to be using, as well as a heading you need to associate with it. So we'll start with that. So as you can see here, we have each of the items here, and keeping in mind that the instructions do say we need a heading for each of these items, minus the introduction, of course, as we discussed earlier, let's go ahead and add those. Now, you could just do question 1, question 2, etc., but a good heading helps you focus your writing by reminding you, oh, that's what you should be focusing on here. So, now, when you are formatting your headings, start out just to type it. But before you go on too long, make sure you format it correctly, which in this case includes formatting it in title case. So, among other things, any word with 4 or more letters gets the first letter capitalized. And also, if we go to the Home part of the ribbon and open the Styles pane, we want to apply the APA Level 1 heading, because after the title, this is the first level heading, so that's APA Level 1. And all these questions are on the same level organizationally, so we should also have APA Level 1 headings for them. Now, you may find a title that works better for you, but in my case, I'm just going to go with informative first. And one of the reasons I recommend doing these headings is that as you write them before you write the part of the paper, it helps you determine what exactly you're going to be doing. Because if this heading was just Coleman situated model of power, then it would sound like you were trying to summarize that model, but that's not the purpose here. The purpose is to apply the model here and use it to understand what's going on. And so here we now have those headings, which is good because that was something that was specifically called out in the instructions to add. Now you can start looking at, okay, what do we need to be retaining here, and what can we remove to focus? Now, the first three questions are adapted from Hawker et al., page 141. It's really helpful for going back and looking at and seeing, okay, what should I be thinking about here? But in terms of, does that say something that you need to be putting in the paper before the introduction? No. And so I've crossed that out to let us focus more specifically on what should be going on here. Now, consider what a dialogue would look like. So dialogues can be formatted in a couple ways, but a general principle is that it should always be clear on who is saying what. So here's an example way of formatting that. Just take Dr. : administrative assistant and keep pasting that so you've got the back and forth. So dialogue is a discussion between two people, and this way it's always clear when they're done talking and when the other person has finished talking. Now you can, depending on how much you write in each thing, you might need more or fewer bullets, but that's enough to get us started. Now, how you start this out will depend on the reading and how you are deciding that when you apply that to this case study, what you think would be the most effective. But regardless, we're going to have the name of who's speaking and then the text that they would say. Now, just to make it extra clear when everything begins and ends, I'm going to add quotation marks here, which is another common thing when you are formatting a dialogue, and it just makes it a little easier to see, okay, that's where who's speaking ends, and that's where they say. And remember, you're not doing the whole conversation, just the beginning. Okay, now let's look at how you might respond to some of these problems. Let's take this one, for example. How might the doctor have changed her power over stance into a more constructive one? Now, if we go back to the no tiers plan, and if we look at the model here, we see our first thing should be a topic sentence. State what you're writing about. So this is where you refer to the case study. Now, the case study has already been introduced in the introduction, according to the instructions given earlier. So state what you're writing about. Oh, okay, just like a one sentence, maybe two sentence description of the specific part of the issue or situation that you're discussing here. Now, as you do the readings, you will come up with more specific ideas, but it's going to follow something like this of, okay, here is your topic sentence. It's describing, okay, here's the issue, and we want to align our language. And then here, the recommendation. and the application from taking that recommendation saying, okay, well, in this case study, do this. Now, in this case, how might. So we want to align that language. Therefore, if the doctor and so you would go through each of the prompts like this, saying, okay, what is this asking me to do? Let me orient the reader to the specific thing, and what would happen? Break down, okay, how did you come to that? Cite the literature, apply it, and move on. Now, let's go back to that instructions. Now, there is the instruction here that you be introducing the scenario in the introduction and including your citation there. So make sure you do that. And if you do something like that, and make sure to fill in the year, and make sure that you add this specific reference to your references section, because after all, you cite it, you should reference it, and vice versa. Once you have done that, you don't need to be writing out described by Hocker et al. Or parentheses Hocker et al. Year for referring to the case study. The instructor has made that clear. You just need to make sure that you clarify what you're referring to, like, oh, in this case study. That's enough after you've done this introduction here. So make sure that you include an outline of the major content of the paper so you can look at this. And what I would not recommend is just copying and pasting these questions verbatim. That would be a very boring and largely redundant introduction. What I would recommend is looking and seeing, okay, how might you group these things? For example, you might say, okay, well, low power stance, power over stance. Oh, these first three things are about how they might adjust. And so you'd write, okay, applying such and such an author suggests that the people in this case study can do this to make things more constructive and more positive. And then you look at this next part and say, okay, well, what's the big picture there that encompasses my answering these questions? And then write about that so we have an idea of, okay, here's a roadmap for the paper. And that will give you a good paragraph for the introduction. And then you'll go through these. I would say whenever you have an instruction about the length, to highlight that, because that's going to be very easy to check if you have a reminder that you're supposed to check it. And then for the rest of these questions, well, let's talk briefly about how to demonstrate synthesis. Now on this slide, here are some of the logical bridges, these phrases that connect the discussion to previous things in the paragraph. There's some of the logical bridges that demonstrate synthesis or help demonstrate that you're synthesizing. And so let's look at how this might come up with one or two of the prompts. Now, this gives you some specific information, and let's briefly digress to talk about how that might be formatted. Because in APA style, we don't own to capitalize model names, or just in sentence case. So what we should have is the author and date, and then the name of the model just written out in lowercase. According to this model, and then you describe some aspect of the model. And then you identify something that's going on. And now we need to connect the two. Now, just looking at the instruction here, we know, okay, you need to talk about the model. You need to talk about something that's going on in the case study to identify a specific event or events, and then connect that with the model, suggesting that this thing is going on. And then tell us, okay, well, is that the only thing, or is there more evidence? How do you know what you know? Or what leads you to have your professional opinion? And then what are the implications of that? That's part of the explain. So looking at our slides there, you could use any number of these as a result because of this. Therefore, consequently, this shows that depending on how many implications you are discussing here, keep in mind also that there are other questions where if your response starts veering into answering one of those other questions, that you should move that discussion to that section so it stays very focused. By the way, the first time you discuss it, it's good to list the whole name of the model, but thereafter, author, date, and then saying the model is fine. Now, one way to indicate that you understand how something is applied here, when it's asking you to say what applying Waller's principle of least interest will give you in terms of insight. Waller's principle of least interest suggests in your description, and one way to illustrate your understanding is to give examples. So, for example, and it's usually good to give more than one example. 2 or 3 is usually more than enough. But the idea of, okay, so the principle suggests that this should be going on, generally speaking. Let's name 2 or 3 specific actions that would facilitate that would bring that out, that would offer solution, as the case may be. If you do that and you clarify what you are doing using these logical bridges, it will make it much more clear that you are answering the prompt fully and that you are understanding both the case study and the readings related to it, and ultimately that you are synthesizing the information together to provide meaningful insights. So I hope that was helpful. If you have questions, you are more than welcome to send us an email at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu to schedule an appointment for writing consultation. And we have many resources available on the Online Writing Center website. Have a good day.